Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we're here for my LCS semifinals and finals overview and analysis. Incredibly excited to get into this, the final two series of the spring split here in the LCS. By the end of this video, we will know the two teams that are going to MSI, or the team that is joining Cloud9 in MSI, and also the seeds that they will be going, because we are going to be crowning our 2023 Spring Split LCS champion by the end of this video. A lot of really exciting stuff coming up. I'm sorry this video is coming out so late. This is coming out, in between Wednesday and Thursday, and, the finals were on Sunday. I do apologize for that. Had a lot of videos on the backlog in other regions that are still playing that I felt like I had to get to first, but also, as you guys know, those who have been following the channel, those who watched my previous video know I was here. I was at both of these series, and so took me a little bit of time to kind of, watch them on film again, try and actually analyze as much as possible and not get swept up in the emotion, but I was, maybe I can give a little bit more insight, I should say, into this series because of how things went when it was live. But I'm excited to hear what you guys thought of it down in the comment section below. If you're interested in my previews of the semifinals and, what I think of Cloud9, who's going to be in the finals, you can check out my round 2 video, and that's going to be up in the iCard right now. You can check that out so you can get an idea of how I feel about all three teams that we're going to be talking about today, of course. But in this video, we're going to be going over the series. We're going to be going game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that both teams showed off, of course, starting with our semi-finals matchup. This is a matchup between the number 2 seeded FlyQuest and the number 6 seeded Golden Guardians, the bottom seed in the playoffs and the top, what was the top team in the league for most of the regular season. Going head-to-head, only one of them can come out on top. Very intriguing matchup on paper. Obviously, the winner here is going to be moving on to MSI. They're going to be moving on to the finals. FlyQuest looking to get to their 3rd finals of all time. Obviously, the year 2020 happened, and they made both of those, or they made both of the finals in 2020, but Golden Guardians, on the other hand, have never been to the finals. This is already the best finish they've ever had, and so both of these, I would say relatively lower reputation orgs, definitely vying for, an opportunity to represent North America on the international stage, as well as the opportunity to potentially go up against a team like Cloud9 and potentially take them down. So how do I think both teams kind of fare here? Well, FlyQuest hasn't exactly been in the best form as of recent, and that is kind of embodied by the fact that they're actually making a substitution going into this series. Their support, Ayla, is out. He was playing for a lot of the second half of the split for them. They were really kind of banking on him being the player that he was in Academy coming into the LCS, and he just quite hasn't been that. I talked about this on Twitter a bit. A small plug, if you don't follow me on Twitter, go follow me there. But Ayla kind of got the short end of the stick in terms of how things ended up working out. He had to try and gel with a team that had already developed a chemistry and already developed an identity, and, you take out a player like Winsome and put Ayla in, obviously things are going to change a little bit. He was not given the luxury of being able to kind of work his way into that. He had to be perfect, basically, from day one, but it really is, it would be wrong to say that he is not better, not better, I should say, than what Winsome was on this team, and so they're going to bring him back. Winsome is going to be starting this series for FlyQuest, and presumably the rest of the playoffs if they were to win this series, and so that kind of embodies what FlyQuest has been going through. A lot of these players are ridiculously talented. Prince was my MVP pick. Vikla, a very, very good player as well. Spica, Impact, all of them have had really good splits, in my opinion, and maybe they just haven't been able to show it as of recent. If they can get back on track, get anywhere close to what they were towards the middle part of the split, they're going to be one of the best teams in North America. But Golden Guardians, talk about a roller coaster of emotions for this team. They started 0-4. They really didn't have a lot of expectations going into the split, even from me. And then they just completely blow it out of the water when Gory gets settled. They go on this 7-game win streak, and then they go back on a losing streak. They lose, 7 of their last 9 games in the LCS? Not a particularly good showing there in the second half of the round robin, but they've been awesome in the playoffs so far. They took down fan favorites in 100 Thieves. They were able to take down Evil Geniuses, 2 of the teams that I think a lot of people just thought had more talent than them, and now they are 1 series away from making it to their first ever finals. A lot of positives coming out from both of these teams, but Golden Guardians might be a little bit hotter, but FlyQuest should be more talented. So that's kind of the rundown here. My prediction was FlyQuest in 4, I believe. It could have been FlyQuest in 3. I think they should have the upper hand and the advantage in this series, but, Golden Guardians certainly not a team you can count out. They've proven that multiple times over the course of the split. So what ended up happening, of course, we're going game by game, starting with game number 1, and the winner of game number 1 was FlyQuest, they are able to pick up the first game in this series. It was relatively back and forth, a fun one for both of these teams, but momentum is so crucial for a team like FlyQuest, and even for a team like Golden Guardians. Both of them have kind of relied a lot on the momentum that they have been carrying throughout the year so far. FlyQuest more in a negative sense of when they're not in a bad state momentum-wise, they're one of the best teams in the league. Golden Guardians have been riding that momentum all the way up until this series, and so FlyQuest being able to generate the lead in this series, I think, is a very, very big positive for them. I think everybody on the team looked good, especially towards the back half of the game. So let's go over what ended up happening throughout. GG actually gets a pretty solid lead in the early game using the Elise power spike, and I really like this idea from Golden Guardians. You draft a bunch of scaling lanes, you draft the Fiora, you draft the Cassante, you draft the Zeri, a lot of lanes that are going to be a lot more proactive in the late game, especially compared to things like the Jace. They're just going to have a little bit more agency towards the back half of those team fights, but you also draft the Elise to be able to create that jungle pressure in the early game to try and get those leads on the side of your team. And quite frankly, some of those plays did work. A good bot dive early on for GG that ends in a 2-for-1. They get first blood and they come out on top. Big Herald fight for them for first Herald. They generate a pretty large lead off of that. I'm talking like 3K-ish at 8 minutes into the game. That's a pretty darn good lead overall for Golden Guardians, and so they're kind of looking pretty solid in the early game, but FlyQuest does equalize around 15 minutes with a really nice fight in the bot lane. Prince and Winsome, we'll talk about them in a bit, but they were really, really good in this game number one. Definitely the standout players in my opinion, and the Jace was doing a ridiculous amount of damage. Good on Spica to be able to keep his ground as well, but basically from that point onwards, the gold is even, and FlyQuest is just kind of the better team, and there's really no other way to describe it. They were out team fighting them, even with a comp that quite frankly shouldn't scale nearly as well. Golden Guardians made some crucial mistakes, positioning-wise, most notably this bot lane, which we will get to, and Fly, macro-wise as well. Fly ends up getting Baron basically for free after they've gotten Soul, and it's really just not a good look for Golden Guardians, kind of letting Fly have a lot of these things. And to kind of, simplify his story a little bit, a lot of fights end up happening in the mid to late game. Fly basically wins them all. Licorice does a good job stalling for time in one of them, but it's more of an eventually thing for FlyQuest. They're able to get Elder, and they're able to end the game. Overall, this was a really solid first showing from them. I wanted to see FlyQuest come out and actively win this first game, actively take control of this series. I think they've always been at their best when they can play their style at their speed, and I think this is very much what this game was. Even though they were giving over some resources in the early game, it certainly wasn't to the point where it got me concerned, and I think most of their players played great. My player of the game is going to go to Winsome. He gets subbed in here, and he gets to play the Braum, and man, the Braum was crucial towards the back half of the game. A lot of people think of Braum as this more, protective, peel-oriented support, but when he can get on the enemy AD carry, he can really make someone like Zeri in particular's life much more difficult, and we saw that a lot throughout the late game here. Just really good stuff coming out from Winsome. Stixxay really couldn't play towards the back half of this game. You can talk about his positioning being way too aggressive. He probably never should have been in range of Braum in the first place, but it ended up happening. Winsome ended up being able to target Stixxay a lot in the back half of these team fights and take them away. I know a lot of people hate on Ayla on Reddit in particular. I'm very sympathetic towards Ayla. I think he's a great player who's incredibly mechanically talented and clearly just lost his mental. Something very similar to Spawn, but I think Spawn isn't quite the same level of talent that Ayla is. He's going to be a very good support in the LCS if he can keep his head on straight. Unfortunately, I do agree that Winsome was definitely the right call here to put in, and he clearly showed that in game number one. Vikla was phenomenal on this Jace. I mean, the amount of damage he was able to output. Spica had a great mid-game, and Prince was really capitalizing on a lot of the mistakes that Golden Guardians were making, even if GG did a lot to try and shut down that Xayah early. So overall, FlyQuest kind of knew their game strategy. If they could get onto the enemy AD carry, if they could get onto the Zeri, there really weren't a lot of other tools for Golden Guardians to win fights unless this Fiora got ridiculously far ahead. And even then, you've got a Maokai, you've got a Sion, you've got a Xayah. These are things that can do really well into trying to beat up on Fiora in the late game, because they can self-peel or they can peel for the Xayah. A lot of really positive stuff coming out from FlyQuest. I think they played their comp really well, and they never panicked when they were down in the early game, which is one of the most important traits. As for Golden Guardians on the other side, just kind of not a big enough lead in the early game, which is frustrating, but you got to be critical of their bot lane and how they played in this game. We've been hyping up Stixxay and Huhi a lot because they really have completely exploded on Golden Guardians across 2023, but this was not a great showing for them. My dud of the game is going to go to Huhi on the Leona, but you could very realistically give this to Stixxay as well. His scoreline line would indicate that he was a little bit more influential, and I think a lot of the early plays ended up going around him, which is why I'm more hesitant to give him dud of the game, but you know, neither of them played particularly well. They both kind of got outclassed in this game. Support diff was definitely on display. Winston was so much more aggressive in the back half of these team fights than Huki, and that's not good when you're Braum into Leona, and then the positioning on Zeri was just bad. These two simply need to play better if Golden Guardians want a chance of being able to take down FlyQuest, who's just going to, they're not going to miss position, and they're not going to mess up fights quite like Golden Guardians did. I did like how Licorice played, and I like River's early aggression, but there's just only so much you can do on the Elise in the mid to late game, and the Fiora wasn't fed enough to be able to take over in a side lane, and so Golden Guardians ends up going down, but it's only 0-1. The series is far from over at this point. There are a lot of good things that can still go the way of GG in this series. They just got to keep their heads on straight, and they got to be able to play their game. They're really good in the early game, but they can sometimes struggle to close stuff out, and we saw that in this series. If you can get a little bit of a bigger lead towards the beginning half, put FlyQuest on the back foot. They're not a team that particularly likes playing from behind. That's what I identified as Golden Guardians' way to go and win this series, is if you can put FlyQuest on the back foot, take them out of their comfort zone, and make them play from a disadvantaged state. That's where a lot of teams have been able to get to FlyQuest, Cloud9 in particular, over the course of this split so far, and so that's what I'm kind of looking for. But FlyQuest, if they can win this game and go up 2-0 in the series, that's basically a death sentence. You do not want to have to win 3 games in a row against Prince and Vikla and Spica, and you know how well this team has played over the course of this split, and so big game here for Golden Guardians. Are they going to be able to take it? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Golden Guardians. They are able to take game number 2, and they're able to even up the series at 1 apiece. Massive stuff coming out from this team. They very much needed to win this game, like I said, and they did it in pretty dominant fashion. We could talk about game 1 being a little bit back and forth. Golden Guardians was not back and forth in this game. They had control basically from moment 1. A lot of really good early plays from a jungle mid duo that is just so good when they are working together and when they are on the same page. We haven't exactly seen that for the entirety of the regular season. I think Gory in particular took a pretty big step back towards the second half of the regular season, but man, when they are working, they are just so fun to watch, and that's not to take away from the rest of the team. Some really fun picks here. I'm actually going to talk about it a little bit before we get into what happened in the game. Obviously, you're looking at this and you're like, what's weird? Jarvan support is weird, right? But like, we've seen it played at high level before. We've seen Mickey play it, most notably for G2. We've seen a lot of people be able to pull it out before, and it can be a really good creation tool, I would say, just in general, especially if you want an engaged style support that can still do a lot of damage in the early game. That's Jarvan. Like, he can do that, but it's the build that really makes this interesting. He goes AP, he goes Crown, he also goes, I believe, Zonya's second item, Morello's coming out from him, like, really good build, and I actually like this a lot coming out from the Jarvan. What you really need to do is be able to burst people down and lock them down, really. Crown is going to give you a lot of sustain. It's going to be able to kind of keep them in there, but Jarvan is surprisingly good AP scaling, and I think just in general, this is kind of an interesting build. I'm not exactly an AP Jarvan expert. I'm sure somebody out there can do a little bit of a better deep dive into what exactly makes this pick really good, but I have a lot of positives to take away from how he played this game, and I think the build actually did help him quite a bit. But in general, let's go ahead and go over what ended up happening in this game. How did he end up impacting the game? Well, some nice early plays coming out from Golden Guardians. They end up getting first blood on Vikla in the mid lane. River ends up invading and really just pushing Spica off of all of his buffs. Really good early pressure coming out from the Wukong. I talk about this a lot. If Vi ends up losing the early game, her mid game is doomed. Like, she really can't do a whole lot if she's not able to farm up and be able to create some impacts in the early game so that she can get some gold on her, and that was not happening in the early game. River was doing his best to make sure that wasn't the case. He ends up going mid straight from invading Spica and ends up getting a kill onto the Talia. Very unfortunate positioning coming out from Vikla. I'll talk about it a bit, but I really didn't like his game all that much. River continues making a lot of early plays. We see a lot of coordinated fights. We see some plays in the bot lane. We see some plays in the mid lane. We see him helping out on the Herald fight, and that's really where things start to blow up, I would say, for Golden Guardians, where the game really starts to change is that first Herald fight. Massive win coming out from GG. They're able to pick up 1 and the Herald, and they're able to use that. And surprisingly, at like, 10, 15 minutes into the game, they got a 5k gold lead. Like, I haven't really been talking about a lot of these plays, but every single lane is winning. The Kennen is obliterating the Sion in the top lane. The Zeri and the Jarvan are actually exuding a crazy amount of pressure, and the Gory is everywhere on the map, and this is where it starts to become a problem. Lissandra and Jarvan as a duo, when it comes to lockdown, when it comes to engage, when it comes to pick, can be very devastating, especially if you add something like a Wukong into that mix. And so we're seeing them start to make some plays. It starts with a gank in the mid lane, and then we see FlyQuest try to make a play in the top lane. We see them continuously try to get this Kennen behind, try to support this Sion in any way that they can, because it feels like it's the only lane that they can actually target at this point in the game. But Golden Guardians have really good mid-game macro, at least in this game, and they're able to counter a lot of the plays that end up happening. Yes, Licorice goes down in a lot of these engages, but Lissandra, Wukong, Jarvan, they end up countering and being able to pull back a lot more gold for Golden Guardians than whatever FlyQuest is getting on the plane. It just constantly kind of puts Golden Guardians in a better position over and over and over again. Now, it certainly was not the cleanest endgame. You can see this took 40 minutes to close out, and with the gold lead that they had, that is pretty unacceptable, and this kind of brings up a point. Golden Guardians has horrible late-game macro. They just do. They've had it all split long, and they certainly had it in this game. Spica just walks up into the Baron pit for first Baron and just steals it. Like, what is going on? Like, nobody thought to CC the Vi and try to keep him out of the pit. He just walks up and presses Smite and gets it, and that's really bad for Golden Guardians, even if they are able to win the fight afterwards. You know, FlyQuest kind of delaying Golden Guardians' ability to push into the base, and then it happens again. FlyQuest doesn't steal it this time. They just sneak the Baron because Golden Guardians don't actually have any vision on it towards the back half of this game. It's just, I don't really understand what they're doing, right? They have such a commanding lead that they need to be controlling the map, and it felt like they were just trying to brute force their way to the end, and FlyQuest was doing a really good job playing around their advantages, which were vision at the time and being able to get objectives that kept them in this game. Now, they couldn't win a single fight towards the back half of the game, which made it very difficult for them to win the game, but it's just concerning stuff coming out from Golden Guardians. But, you know, I'm kind of being a little bit of a Debbie Downer. Let's talk about the good things. Stixxay dominated the late game here. He actively 2v1. Vi goes in, misses her Q, and he just kills Vi and Xayah immediately. Like, there's just nothing you can do to stop a Zeri who has this much gold, and GGR luckily winning every fight. They end up getting Elder. They win the fight at Elder, I should say, and they end up closing the game. It is a good win for Golden Guardians. They were the better team throughout. There's just some question marks about their ability to close out games, but for the most part, their early game was so good that it's hard to be critical. My player of the game is going to go to River in the jungle. He was just everywhere on the map. You could very realistically give this to anybody on the team, maybe with the exception of Licorice. He did win lane, but just wasn't quite as impactful, in my opinion, as River, Gory, Stixxay, and Huhi, all of which had really, really good games here in game number 2. But the Wukong was everywhere. River, when he's able to generate those early leads, is just so oppressive. He's really good at being able to stack objectives and make sure that FlyQuest can't play the game. Now, a lot of that does fall away in the late game, but it's good to see that he hasn't in the early game. Gory, Stixxay, Huhi, everybody did their job. I think Gory in particular is going to get undersold for how good of a game he had here. This jungle mid duo, like I said, when they're playing at their peak level, are just unstoppable. They're one of the best in the entire league, and we saw that here. Stixxay 1v2ing Huhi with the awesome build and the great engages. Just good stuff from Golden Guardians, maybe minus some of the macro choices at the end of the game. As for FlyQuest, you tried. I mean, you got blasted at the start of this game, and that just makes it a lot more difficult to even play out the mid game. Vikkla's gonna get my dud of the game because it felt like on Taliyah, you need to be the one that's trying to make plays. You need to be the one that's linking up with your jungler, but you got destroyed in the mid lane matchup. Quite frankly, you were down so much by the time we hit the mid game that the Taliyah really couldn't do anything. We saw her not even really be able to hurt the Lissandra at all, who went full damage this game, and so the Taliyah ends up being my dead of the game, mostly because there just wasn't a lot that she could do. But Vickla had a really bad game, and he has these every once in a while. He has really good ones too, as we saw in game 1, but, you know, he's going to be a little bit inconsistent with what he offers, like he has been over the back half of this split, but he certainly wasn't the only one. Impact got blasted in the top lane, and while he did make some good plays towards the back half to keep the game alive, like, he wasn't a positive, just not a negative for the team. Spica got super far behind on the Vi, and yes, he was able to get some objectives, but outside of that, no fights were going in favor of him. He was ulting the Wukong every fight, which is not good. That's not what you want out of the Vi. And then Prince and Winsome were just, you know, generally speaking, useless. Like, there really just wasn't a lot that they could do because the Zeri and the Jarvan had pressure the entire game, and so, you know, I guess some good from FlyQuest in the ability that they were able to get some objectives in the late game, but digging yourself such a hole makes it very difficult to kind of congratulate this team on anything they did here. But you got to put it again in the back of your mind. As tilted as this game, as tilting as this game could be for Fly, it's only 1-1. Like, you only need to win 2 of the last 3 to win this series, and you can absolutely do that. You have the talent to do so, and Golden Guardians can absolutely do that as well. Both teams are definitely still in a position to be able to win so long as they play well towards the back half. So who's going to be able to do it? Game 3 is going to be very important to take momentum in this series and be 1 game away from moving on to the finals. And who's going to take it? Well, the winner of game number 3 was FlyQuest, they are able to take game number 3 here, and they're able to go up in the series 2-1. Big win. You want to get that momentum under your belt. You want to force the other team, Golden Guardians in this case, to have to win 2 games in a row against you while you only have to win 1 in order to close out this series. And I'm gonna be honest, guys, I like being the positive force on this channel. I like being someone that likes to talk about the good in League of Legends, because I think that there are plenty, and I mean plenty of people out there who love to talk about the bad. I mean, plenty of people who like to tell you how bad every single pro player is and how much better they are, right? Like, there's so many delusional people like that out there that I try to be a positive force for the community. But I gotta tell you how it is. This was not a very clean game from either of these teams. This was not exactly, you know, Gen G versus T1 over here. This was a little bit worse, I would say, than what those two teams were offering. But at the end of the day, FlyQuest still coming out on top. They weren't able to generate an early lead again. Some really poor decision-making from them, contesting objectives that they really don't have a ton of right to contest, especially with the comps that they have. I mean, look, Ornn, Maokai, Jinx, you're going to be great in the endgame. If you can get to these team fights, you've got a lot of frontline, and if the Jinx can go off, like, you've got Engage, you've got Rakan, you've got a lot of ways to deal with Golden Guardians in the back half of this game. However, if you try to fight Olaf, Wukong, Caitlyn early game, you're just not going to win. Like, you're just probably not going to be able to deal with that, and yet they continued to do that. We can go moment by moment kind of talking about what happened. Spica actually gets first dragon. He steals it. Golden Guardians kind of take it all the way, and then, you know, Maokai just walks into the pit and takes it. Not the first time that's happened in this series. Probably not going to be the last time this happens in this series, but you know, Spica was a little bit of a monster with that smite button, and River certainly not exactly on his smite game this series, but didn't really matter too much. At around, 8 minutes into the game, we get a big Herald fight, which very much ends up going in the favor of Golden Guardians. They're able to generate basically like a 3k gold lead off of that play by itself, which is insane. Like, just the amount of gold that Golden Guardians gets out of winning fights, it's just so much different. It feels like they're constantly winning lane anyways, and so any sort of lead that they get in terms of kills just ends up being a little bit of a problem for FlyQuest, and quite frankly, that's just what FlyQuest has done this series, is throw away any sort of neutrality in the early game by not being able to keep up in lane, especially top lane, which has been a problem in terms of CS, and mid lane kind of in that same boat, and then not really being able to fight early either, picking these late game comps and then trying to force things at the start of the game. It's just not exactly what I would try to do. Fly do get some gold back with some mispositioning coming out from Golden Guardians in the mid game. Catches on River, who's just playing way too aggro. We're going to get into that in a lot of this game, but eventually Golden Guardians is still able to kind of pressure their advantage. Now, what I like to describe the mid game as in here is Golden Guardians getting pretty much every objective, or at least every traded objective in the game, and then FlyQuest winning every fight in the game, actually getting the kills. So Golden Guardians would often be trading, oh, we're going to go in on second dragon, and we're going to fight, and we're going to lose the fight, but we're going to get the dragon, right? Like, that happened at second dragon, it happened at third dragon, it happened at first baron. There was just so many times in this game where it was like, okay, Golden Guardians get the objective, but FlyQuest win the fight. And we end up getting to a game state where FlyQuest is about, like, 500 gold ahead, right? Like, it's not this, like, gigantic lead or anything, but that's when the late game comes in, and the late game really is just a problem for Golden Guardians. There really is no other way to put it. FlyQuest was ahead by this point, and they had been generating a small lead. It wasn't gigantic, but it certainly was a lead, and Golden Guardians is like, well, we still can fight, right? We're Caitlyn, Wukong, Olaf, and it's 25 minutes in the game. We're still going to be able to fight, right? And they go super deep on a couple of different engages. The first one at the second Baron that they end up just getting super punished for. Not as punished as they probably could have been. FlyQuest wasn't quite as aggressive as they needed to be there. Vikla was, but nobody else on the team was exactly following up. And then after that, Golden Guardians ends up going way too deep after they stop the push with Baron, and they end up just getting aced and losing the game from that point. It's just really unfortunate stuff coming out from Golden Guardians. Not a very good game from them, but FlyQuest had some positives in this one. I do think that the opportunity for them to kind of fight their way out of what was an objective deficit was a good idea, and Vikla in particular, I think, is not going to get nearly the kind of credit that he deserves for his team fighting on Jace in this game. Obviously, there's a lot of memes about how Vikla is really only good on Jace, but that's just not the case. Anybody who watched the regular season knows that is obviously not the case, but he was really good in this game here, and definitely, earned his stripes. My player of the game, though, is again going to go to Winsome, and this one isn't quite as obvious as the first game. I think the Braum was definitely the standout member in game one, but this was more of a team effort from FlyQuest. You were noticing a lot of the Rakan engages. Maybe I'm just high on Winsome because I loved him in the NACL. I loved watching him play with Masu. They were one of the most fun bot lanes in the entire league to watch, and there wasn't really another standout player on FlyQuest, maybe with the exception of Vikla, but Winsome for me was probably the most noticeable engage threat, and he really did set Prince up a lot for a lot of the damage. But I think you want to give it to Winsome, you want to give it to Vikla, hell, you want to give it to Spica. Like, there are a lot of different good options in this game, and I think FlyQuest did, you know, what they were supposed to. They didn't make a lot of mistakes. They team fought relatively well, which is a strength of them, and they were able to end up closing out the game, capitalizing on the mistakes of Golden Guardians. But as for GG, on the other side, not good, man. Like, this was just not a good game from them in basically any aspect. Gory's gonna get my dud of the game because the Taliyah ults were bad and the team fighting was worse. Like, he just wasn't on the map. He wasn't dealing damage. This champion is super weak right now. It's got a 0% win rate in the LPL and the LCK. I think it's only got like a 33% win rate here in the LCS. Like, it's just not a very good pick globally right now. It's not really working out in the playoffs in any region, and yet we continuously see teams go to it. I understand the thought behind it. You want to get out on the map. You want to be able to help your jungler try and initiate early leads, but Taliyah just doesn't help enough to be able to justify the pick right now. There are other things that I think can do it at a high level. Lissandra definitely one of them. It was banned out in this game, but if not, just go for something that can team fight. Veigar was left up on the board, and I just don't understand why you're not going for something like that in this game. It gives you a ton more late game pressure, and while it doesn't necessarily fit into this early game snowball hype train, at least it gives you an option and an out in the late game, and it's not particularly awful into Jace or anything like that. And so, you know, that probably would have been a direction I would have preferred to go in, but Gory didn't actually play all that well. River was miserable towards the back half of this game. His engages were just not good, and I think we're learning that, again, you know, I talked about this a lot in the regular season. If River and Gory don't play well, this team doesn't win. Like, as good as Stixay, Huhi, and Licorice have been, you know, especially in the playoffs, it's very difficult for this team to win if jungle mid aren't stopping their opposition, and they've been really good over the course of the playoffs so far. So definitely some things to unlock here for Golden Guardians as we move into game number 4, but it's do or die now. If you lose this series, you're going home, but if you win this game, we're moving to a Silver Scrapes game number 5, and we all know those can go basically in any direction, and so FlyQuest probably want to close this out as soon as possible, but Golden Guardians going to be fighting to stay alive. Who's going to win game number 4, I should say? Is Golden Guardians going to stay alive, or is the series going to end here? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Golden Guardians. They are able to win game number 4 somehow, some way, in the way that this game ended up going down, and they're able to push us to a game number 5. Incredibly excited, but man, how did Fly end up losing this game? This felt unlosable at points in the mid-game, and then no other way to describe it but the perfect fight coming out for GG to be able to wrap up the game a lot quicker than I think a lot of people expected it to be wrapped up. So let's go ahead and talk about it because, man, there were some interesting plays in this game. We're gonna start it off with, you know, going over what ended up happening at level 1, which I can't really explain. Vikla ends up dashing over the wall, I guess not expecting the rest of the team to be there, and he just gets absolutely obliterated at level 1. It's a big lead for Golden Guardians, but not something FlyQuest can't overcome because a lot of the early plays do end up going Fly's way. Kind of, you know, the game gets into their hands pretty early on. River on this Elise is trying for some early action, which I do like. That's what Golden Guardians has been really good at over the course of this split, but FlyQuest was ready to answer that. I think the Gragas was good in the early game, but the Sylas was really making some plays in the early fights as well. Prince and Winsome doing a good job to roam around the map, make sure they're at the plays that really matter, and this Lucian gets super far ahead. Prince ends up, you know, roaming up to get a double kill early on, and then a couple of picks in the mid game get Prince like 4 or 5 kills by the mid game, and I think it was 4 kills by the mid game, and it's like, okay, well, the Lucian now is strong. There's really no way that Golden Guardians are going to be able to contest anything, and that looks kind of true for a while. This game looks like it's FlyQuest's to lose, and quite frankly, it was FlyQuest to lose. Unfortunately, what they did was go and lose it, and the way that they did that was just kind of let Golden Guardians sneak a lot of things on the map and just position poorly and make bad macro decisions and kind of pull a Golden Guardians, quite frankly, in the mid to late game here. The Golden Guardians ends up sneaking that first Baron, and the only Baron of the game that ends up getting taken, which is massive for them. There really was no reason that they should have been able to control that pit, but FlyQuest had no idea that that play was going on, and Golden Guardians ends up taking it, very similar to what OMG were able to do in a do-or-die game number 4 in the LPL playoffs as well. So kind of funny coincidence there, but you know, just some bad plays coming out from FlyQuest. Not necessarily ones that looked like bad plays on paper, but ones that kind of compounded into giving Golden Guardians enough to be able to get back into the end game. The big one being Prince overextending in the mid lane. He does completely burst combo Stixay and absolutely obliterate him when he's by himself in the mid lane, but he wasn't by himself. We see River and Gory and all of them kind of go in and protect themselves and be able to get counter kills onto Prince and Winsome, so it ends up being a 2-for-1 with the shutdown gold that comes from killing the Lucian. And so big stuff going going over to Golden Guardians, but still not enough to completely change the tide of this game. Where that ended up happening was the Soul fight. FlyQuest are on Soul Point here at Dragon. It looks completely and utterly free. You've got a Sylas going into Malphite with Malphite ult. Malphite getting caught out earlier on, now doesn't have his flash, decided to extend it or expend his flash in the bot lane rather than expend his ultimate, which comes in incredibly clutch towards the back half of this fight. Vikla uses his Malphite ult to try and get onto Stixxay, but literally the perfect frame ultimate coming out from Stixxay on this Xayah to dodge the Vikla ultimate, and then Licorice playing incredibly slow, incredibly patient, ends up getting a 4-man Malphite ultimate. It is just simply the best combo that you could have gotten. Golden Guardians is able to pick up that fight. It's the only fight that they were able to win the entirety of the game, but it was such a perfectly played fight from them. They're able to ace FlyQuest, they're able to march it down mid lane, and they're able to end the game off of that one fight, and that one fight alone. Unreal stuff coming out from Golden Guardians. The fact that they were able to walk out of this with a win truly is extraordinary, but it's hard to talk about this game without talking about the two big veterans on this team that people have been questioning, or more so I have been questioning over the past year or so, and those being Licorice and Stixxay. Obviously, Stixxay's had a great year. I think a lot of people would claim that he has been one of the better AD carries in North America, and I think you're right on when you say that. There's been a lot of really good ADs in NA this split so far, but Stixxay is definitely one of them. He obviously helping him a lot in that regard, but I've been pretty low on Licorice going into the playoffs, what he was able to accomplish in the regular season. He was really, really bad last year, in summer in particular. I actually thought he was pretty good in spring, but his summer was a disaster, and the beginning of this split was also a disaster for him, but he's been getting more consistent as the year has gone on, and this was like the turnaround point for him. A beautiful 4-man Malphite ult to, quite frankly, just win Golden Guardians the game, and to have the wherewithal to flash in that bot lane where you get caught, as opposed to ulting out, which has a lower cooldown. If he doesn't have ult for that fight, they simply cannot win it. Really, really good stuff coming out from Licorice. He's going to get my player of the game here in game number 4. They don't win without him here. And to pick Malphite and to have R5 Sylas on the other side and to be able to have that kind of impact on the game, it's just really, really good stuff. But you can't understate, I should say, how good Stixxay and Huhi were this game. Stixxay in particular. That was literally a frame-perfect Xayah ult in that last fight to dodge the Sylas ultimate. And it couldn't have been better. You absolutely needed that. If you get hit by that, you don't win the fight. But his damage in the back half, his spacing, he's just been fantastic. Outside of game 1, I would say he's been really, really good over the course of this series so far. Really no notes. I mean, just really, really good stuff from him. He was good on the Rakan. Gory was really picking up a lot on the Tristana, a lot more than people are going to give him credit for. And I thought River, while he was probably the least important member of Golden Guardians in game number 4, certainly didn't deserve to be, like, ridiculed in this one. So just a perfect fight from Golden Guardians, and they were able to win off of it. But for FlyQuest, disappointing. You should have closed out the series here. There is literally no excuse for you not winning this game. Prince getting a little bit over eager in the mid lane and getting caught out, giving a ton of gold over to Golden Guardians. It just wasn't very good, but, you know, giving away Baron for free, basically just because Golden Guardians are sneaking it, not being able to win a fight where you're up a ridiculous amount of gold. Like, this game should have not been close, but yet FlyQuest made it close because they weren't able to close. I talked about it being FlyQuest's game to lose. Unfortunately, they lost it. My dud of the game is going to go to Spica, not because he particularly played awful, but because I think you can give a lot of the other players on this team more of the benefit of the doubt. Vikla had some really good catches in the mid game. Prince was ridiculous throughout the early and mid game, and Winston was a big reason why that Lucian was such a problem. It was Spica that really wasn't, you know, really making an impact on the game as a whole. I think you could realistically give this dud of the game to the Elise on the other side with River as well, but I think Spica just had not a very impactful late game here, and you really need to, as Gragas, into the Elise. You need to be that extra, like, creating factor on the side of FlyQuest, and he just wasn't able to do it. Impact wasn't particularly great in the end part either. He was just getting blown up early on in fights, but I mean, there's really nothing else to say. Like, you can criticize FlyQuest's, you know, individual micro plays all you want, especially in that final fight, but they should have been able to close it out a lot earlier than this. Them being able to give over that Baron, them, you know, allowing Golden Guardians to get free gold off of that pick in the mid lane, like, it's just stuff that should never happen. And unfortunately, it just kind of ended up being that way. But now, you're going into a game number 5. The series is not over. The winner of this game will head to LCS Finals, will head to MSI, and both of these teams really, really want that. So who's going to be able to take it? Whose split is going to end here, and who's going to be moving on to face Cloud9? Well, the winner of game number 5 was Golden Guardians, they are able to win game number 5. They're able to win their way into the LCS finals, and for the first time in the organization's history, they are able to represent North America at an international event. Oh my god, I can't even begin to describe to you how unbelievable this is for GG as an org, for these players in particular as a team, for them to be able to be one of the top 2 teams in the league in spring. It's just an utter success coming out from this team. No one believed in them in the preseason, me included. We all had them as the 8th best team. I think unanimously people had them as the 8th best team in the league. But here they are, the 2nd at the very worst best team in the league, potentially with the opportunity to make themselves the best team in the league. And so really good stuff from Golden Guardians. A really, really good series. And you want to talk about how the series was kind of back and forth. Golden Guardians not necessarily dominating the games that they've won. Well, they dominated game number 5. They came out with a vengeance and with aggression on their mind, and they were able to capitalize on it. Look at FlyQuest draft as opposed to Golden Guardians. They have to rely on these early plays to be able to make it. At least Jace can be very scary, but you're trying to fight into something like a Lucian Nami early. You've got Lissandra who can move around the map. River is on his best champion, and you could say the same for Licorice on the Fiora. And so a lot of things going in favor of Golden Guardians in draft, and you know, even if FlyQuest did get a lot of the picks they wanted, they weren't necessarily able to capitalize on them in the same way. Level 1 cheese for FlyQuest. They try to go for the ridiculous Scion play that we've seen multiple times. The 4-man dive bot at level 1 with the leash for the jungle at level 2, and so they go for that, but they don't end up getting it. Really good rotations from Golden Guardians. Stixxay ends up getting first blood, and quite frankly, FlyQuest's early game is just ruined from this, and it's Elise, Jace, Xayah. Like, your early game being ruined is not good. It puts a really big target on your back, and quite frankly, Golden Guardians takes that and completely runs away with it. Golden Guardians end up diving bot lane with 4 people out to tier 2 tower. They end up getting 2 kills there. FlyQuest tries their best to try and get something back onto Licorice on this Fiora, but he is way too strong at this point, and obviously he's very good at this champion. He ends up outplaying some plays in the bot lane. He gets assistance from his team. He generates some gold. And then we more catches, more catches, more catches. We end up getting the 3rd Drake, which is just a massive win for Golden Guardians, and this is really where the game gets busted open. It was definitely in GG's favor before this, but it was over, basically, by the time 3rd Drake rolls around. River ends up stealing the 4th dragon to tie things up at 2 apiece, and then there's really just nothing left. Like, I would love to go into a deep dive for what ended up happening in this game and how Golden Guardians got there, but it was just win after win after win after win for Golden Guardians until they were eventually able to just run it down in the base, win a fight, and win the game. Like, this was a dominant performance. 28 minutes honestly doesn't sell it enough. This could have been a 22-minute game had some things gone a little bit more in favor of Golden Guardians. They were getting a lot of wins, but it was a lot of 1 for 0s, 2 for 0s, 3 for 0s. If they got those aces early on in the game, if FlyQuest wasn't playing so passive, this could have been a 22-minute game. Like, it really wouldn't have been all that shocking, right? Golden Guardians just played really well. Licorice is going to get my player of the game here, and he was awesome in this series. There really is not a lot of negatives I can toss this way. He's not only going to be my player of the game in Game 5, he's going to be my player of the series for Golden Guardians. He was awesome in the top lane, and I'll admit it, I counted him out. I was out on Licorice by the midpoint of this split. I was really down on what he was offering in summer of 2022, and then he came into 2023, and he was kind of the weak link of this team. Definitely not, you know, winning in the top lane in the isolated 1v1s, definitely not contributing a lot in team fights, but he has slowly just been getting his confidence back game after game after game as we've gone throughout the split, and it's kind of culminated in this semifinal series where he goes against one of his former teams, a player that he's played many times, a player that he replaced on Cloud9 way back in the day in Impact, and he just beats him. Like, he's just better in the top lane. He's the best player in the series, and he was amazing. The Fiora pick, obviously the classic from him from back in the day, continues to look great. These duelist champions have always been kind of his bread and butter, kind of what he's liked to do the most, and that very much came out in this series, but he's far from the only player who played well. You have to talk about Stixxay and Huhi. Stixxay really in particular had amazing team fighting in this series, even on champions that aren't necessarily known for their team fighting, like Lucian. You know, he can be really strong in the late game if you have gold, but he's not, he has to be able to generate those early plays, and Stixxay was just so aggro across this whole series. He's not afraid to put himself in harm's way in order to deal damage, and that's a trait that I'm always going to reward as an AD carry. I think that's just a generally positive trait. Yes, sometimes you're going to get caught out, but it's up to your support to keep you alive. You got to be the one to try and make the plays, and I think Huhi did a great job keeping him alive. Stixxay was great River and Gory were really good in this series on the champions that they could be proactive on. The Lissandra especially, I imagine, is going to be a permaban against Golden Guardians for the rest of their season. It was so good, it created so much on the map. And River finally getting his classic Jarvan, but any of these early game junglers, things like the Elise were obviously super big for him in this series, and so congrats to GG, man. This team is just so fun to watch. This org is so easy to cheer for with their personnel and their history and just everything that is involved with Golden Guardians. I'm so happy they were able to take this, and I'm so happy they're moving on to the finals. As for FlyQuest, I mean, disappointing. There's no other word to say. Like, they need to be in finals. With this roster, with the way that they performed, for them not to be a top 2 team in the league, it's just not acceptable. And, you know, it's unfortunate because they really had this series in their hands in game number 4. They should have been able to close out this game, but they weren't able to do it. Vikla's going to get my dud of the game for game number 5. It was kind of a team effort getting destroyed, right? I gave it to Vikla, but give it to Impact, give it to Spica, give it to Prince, give it to Winsome. Nobody played well in this game. You can give it to all of them. This is a team dud of the game coming out from FlyQuest. And really, when you're trying to diagnose the problem, I don't know where you start. Nobody really played all that well in their losses in this series. Like, yes, they were able to team fight their way out of some disadvantages, but, you know, at the end of the day, you got to be able to lane, like, at some point. And with the talent that's on this team, it's just kind of unacceptable for them to be down in so many of these games. And so for FlyQuest, they're going to be kicking themselves because they really should not be in this position. Lucky for them, it is just spring. Like, again, like, I know we're going to overreact and call FlyQuest in a team that has no upside and has no way to grow, but again, this is just spring. We've seen teams come back from a much worse spring to turn it around and go on and win or even just compete in summer. FlyQuest has plenty of time to get this roster together. They have the talent to be the best team in the league. It's just not going to be theirs in spring. They're eliminated here, and they're going to have a lot of work to do to try and get back to that top 1, top 2 status. But for Golden Guardians, it is now time to move on to the finals and to move on to Cloud9. Incredibly intrigued in that matchup, and we're not going to have to wait too long to talk about it because it's coming up right now. But now that we've covered the semifinals, there's only one more series left in the LCS to cover this year, and that is the 2023 Spring Split Finals between the number 1 seeded Cloud9 and the number 6 seeded Golden Guardians. Who would have thunk, right? The top seed in the playoffs playing against the lowest seed in the playoffs in the finals. We all kind of knew Cloud9 was going to be here. Maybe we all thought it would go a little bit differently. Maybe we thought a team like FlyQuest would be able to kind of usurp them as the playoffs went on, but they've really been able to exude dominance throughout the entirety of the second half of the split, and that kind of carried over into the playoffs as well. But Golden Guardians, I mean, we already talked about how big underdogs they were against FlyQuest in the semifinals, let alone Cloud9 in the finals. Not a lot of people are picking Golden Guardians in this series, and I know I didn't exactly do a preview for it, but you kind of have an idea of how Golden Guardians likes to play. They're really good in the early game. They are really bad in the late game, and Cloud9 are really one of the few teams that I think can contest them in the early game, and their late game is just much better, with players like Berserker being some of the best team fighters in the league. I think Cloud9 should probably waltz to a victory here with the momentum on their side. I think I said Golden Guardians would take 1 game, but that's at max. I think this is either going to be a 3-0 or a 3-1 on the side of Cloud9, but man, I've been doubting Golden Guardians all year long. Are they going to continue to prove me wrong in this series? Well, let's go ahead and find out, going game by game, starting, of course, with game number 1. And game number 1 was a Cloud9 win some way and somehow. How did Golden Guardians lose this? This is one of the biggest throws that I have seen in professional League of Legends in a long time. There is no excuse for Golden Guardians losing this game. Completely, I guess unacceptable is the word I'm looking for. Completely unacceptable from Golden Guardians to not walk away with a 1-0 series win, but really good on Cloud9 to stay resilient, to stay perseverant, and to be able to come out on top in this game with a comp that, quite frankly, just wasn't in a position to actually make a lot of plays unless Golden Guardians messed up. Well, congratulations to C9. You are leading the series now 1-0. Let's go ahead and talk about what happened. A ton of stuff happened in this game, and so I'm going to try to, bring it down at least a little bit, but man, this game was insane. Golden Guardians gets a crazy lead in the early game. Some really nice plays. First of all, Berserker and Sven were really bad in lane. Like, Berserker was fine, quote-unquote, but he wasn't pressuring in the same way that you kind of need to as Aphelios into Zeri. You want to be able to try and generate some early pressure on that side, especially with something like Thresh. You want to be able to try and have Prio in that lane, and they quite frankly just didn't. Sven ends up missing Flay onto Huhi to disengage them, and that's Stixxay and Huhi's, you know, like, a warning sign to be like, go, 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 and they go in, and they fully are able to 2v1 Sven down, and end up picking first blood in the isolated 2v2 in the bot lane, which just is disastrous on the side of C9. You can't really allow this to happen. You certainly can't let the Zeri get online early in the game, and that's kind of what happened there. A couple of really good plays going Golden Guardians' way the rest of the early game. River with a nice gank top, not once but twice, onto a lane-swapped Eminus. They really wanted this Olaf into Cassante matchup. They were willing to play Eminus top lane into the Kennen, and River really wanted to get that Orianna behind, and he was able to do that. Two really well-coordinated ganks to get that Orianna on the back foot in the early game. Some more good plays coming out from Stixxay and Huhi, are just gapping C9 at this point. They're able to kill Berserker under tower by themselves. 1v1 trade around Herald that no one's able to pick up, but Golden Guardians keeps the pressure from it. Just a lot of stuff going in favor of Golden Guardians, and, you know, I could kind of go on and on. There were a lot of really interesting plays. Golden Guardians stealing Dragon, you know, a dive bot lane going to GG, the first Baron fight going to GG, but I think in fairness, you know, to kind of get through this, because a lot of shit happened in this game, really where things started to go wrong for Golden Guardians. Licorice ends up getting solo killed by Eminus in the bot lane. Not a great play, but not like a disastrous play either. Like, you can definitely still win the game. It's second Baron. It's second Baron where things just, I mean, completely implode for Golden Guardians. So not really able to do all that much with first Baron, but they still got like an 8-9k gold lead in this game, and this is just a disastrous team fight. Golden Guardians go way too deep trying to chase Cloud9 with Gory coming in on the flank to try and separate them, but they just underestimate this Olaf's power to be able to just say, screw it, like, I'm just gonna go in, and I'm gonna get on your backline, and I'm gonna fight, and that's exactly what the Olaf did. He ran at them, and he killed them. He killed Stixxay, he killed Huhi, and then Golden Guardians have no damage. You've got a Kennen who's already used ultimate, he's not gonna hurt. You've got a Sedge and a Cassante, like, they're not gonna hurt. Where exactly are you gonna be able to win this fight? Where are you gonna break through Olaf now, and especially with Ori shield, and you've got Thresh Lantern, like, what exactly are you going to do? They're not able to do anything, and Fudge is able to absolutely obliterate them. They're able to get Baron as well, which is really big for Cloud9. It's not enough to make the gold even or anything like that, but it certainly puts them back into the game. C9 then goes and steals away Soul Point. Golden Guardians feel like they have this completely locked down, but Blabber gets in the pit and is able to steal it away, and so GG doesn't end up getting Soul, and they end up acing Golden Guardians at third Baron to somehow get a gold lead in this game. They were down 8-9k. And all of a sudden, it's a gold lead. It's a 1k gold lead for Cloud9, and Golden Guardians is praying that something can go right for them in this game. They just can't really get it. C9 ends up credit to keeping their mental, credit to not tilting, and credit to being able to win this. Player of the game is easily going to go to Fudge in the top lane. I thought he was incredibly snubbed in terms of MVP votes. He wasn't even a finalist. He wasn't a top 3 MVP vote getter, and I think that's pretty ridiculous. To me, he was the most valuable player on his team in the league because there was just no other top laner that had the same kind of impact that Fudge had. Berserker was awesome, and I do think that, you know, I'm never going to complain about Berserker winning MVP. He is probably the best player in the league, even if he wasn't the most valuable, quote-unquote, over the entire split, in my opinion, but you know what I mean? Like, I can't argue with Berserker, but to have someone like Blabber, I love Blabber to death over Fudge, I just don't think that that is a fair thing to say. I think Fudge is underrated. Not that Blabber's overrated. Everybody who follows the channel knows I have a weird obsession with calling Blabber like the greatest jungler in North American history, and I do believe that, but Fudge is underrated at this point. Like, I'm willing to say that. He is easily, like, he's far and away top 1, and he's probably a top 3 to 4 player in the league, and I think that he's proven that consistently. Great Olaf game here. He knew exactly how he needed to get back in the game and win, and even though he didn't really generate a big lead early in the game, he was able to do a really good job of being able to capitalize on, you know, mistakes the Golden Guardians were making in the back half to be able to come in and become the unstoppable monster that we know Olaf can be. I thought Berserker also played really well. Sven had some nice engages, even if he completely trolled the early game. Like, this was a miserable early game from Sven. Big reason why Golden Guardians was able to get the lead was because Sven was so bad, but, you know, he ends up making up for it in a lot of these team fights. Berserker doing a ridiculous amount of damage, and Cloud9's able to take it. Really good from them, but if you're going to want to win more than one game in this series, like, it's crazy to say that, but you got to be able to at least compete in the early game. Like, yes, Golden Guardians is a disaster late game, and this game is just another example of that, but, you know, you've got to be able to at least go even with a team like GG in the early game in order to consistently be able to kind of win your way back. Like, this kind of performance cannot be replicated, or at least cannot be expected to be replicated. And then for Golden Guardians, you're going to kick yourself for this one if you end up losing the series. This was a you must win game for Golden Guardians. Like, I have no other way to describe it. Losing this is disastrous. Hopefully you can keep your mental, because this would tilt the ever-living, like, shit out of me. Like, I would not be ready to go back out on stage for a game number 2. My dud of the game is going to go to Licorice. This was a miserable Kennen performance. He ends up building the aggressive build. We see this all the time in the LPL. It's pretty much the only build that any LPL top laners go where Kennen has really been picking up steam as a popular pick, and you know, quite frankly, this was not the game for it. You've got a lot of rundown on the side of C9. You've got a lot of ways to kind of stop the Kennen even without the exhaust to just burst him down. And without Zhonya's, he's just way too susceptible to being completely destroyed. And quite frankly, Licorice should not have a good game. He wasn't particularly good in laning phase. He capitalized on some really good river ganks and then was just kind of nothing the rest of the game. Was getting killed in side lanes, was not being effective in team fights. For as good as he was in the semis, he's got to step it up again in the finals to be just as important, but nobody really played all that well towards the back half. River whiffed every single Sejuani ultimate towards the back half of this game. Gory went on a completely nothing flank. Stixay and Huki just really couldn't do anything in this game. Golden Guardians was just outclassed in the back half, and they were up 8 to 9k gold. This is disastrous. You've got to be able to keep your level head here going into game number 2 because you had them. Like, you absolutely had this game. You need to take away the positives from the beginning and just kind of forget about what happened towards the back half of the game. Of course, learn from your mistakes and grow, but you can't go in saying like, oh, we don't trust ourselves in team fights. That's not the mentality that is going to get you over a team like Cloud9, but it's big on Golden Guardians now to win game number 2. Always talk about this. You can't go down 0-2, especially to a team like Cloud9. You're not going to win 3 games in a row. Very likely not going to win 3 games in a row against Cloud9. So you got to win this game 2 to keep your playoff hopes alive. But are they going to be able to do it? Or C9 going to take a dominant 2-0 series lead? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Golden Guardians. They are able to pick up the win here in game number 2. They don't throw the early lead that they're able to generate like they did in game number 1, and they're able to even up the series at 1 apiece. And honestly, who saw this coming? Through the first 2 games of the series, I think you can make a really strong case that Golden Guardians has been the better team. They should have won game 1. They weren't able to do that. They should be up 2-0, but should-be's don't matter in League of Legends. It doesn't matter how close you were. If you're not able to take down that Nexus, none of the things you did before that actually matter in the end. And that was the case in game 1. Luckily, they were able to close it out here in game number 2. Really good showing from them. Let's go ahead and talk about what happened. This is going to be another kind of short recap because there's just not a lot to talk about. This was a very, I don't want to say low-action game, but a very predictable game in terms of crazy plays that ended up changing the outcome of what ended up happening. Really good early lead coming out from Golden Guardians. Really aggressive play from them, most specifically around that first dragon that gets them a nice lead. Stixay and Huki are just so good at these early skirmishes. They are probably the best bot lane in the North America. What am I talking about? In the LCS. At skirmishing early on, especially when going against Drakes, and River's very good at engaging at low levels. Now, he definitely makes some questionable decisions and has certainly not been the best smiter across the playoffs so far, but, you know, his early games I think have been pretty fantastic, and that's why picks like Wukong can be so great for him to play. Licorice gets on the Malphite, which is a pick that obviously this team has found quite a bit of success on over the course of the year, and I think Malphite in general can be really solid, especially into something like Zeri, just because you have instant lockdown for this area if you're able to land the ultimate, as well as the ability to just kind of tank up a lot of the damage with Malphite's inherent armor resist. And with those kind of, I don't want to say like draft gaps, but like with those advantages and things that Golden Guardians know how to play towards, they are able to generate a pretty solid lead in the early game. Now, Herald fight is a little bit back and forth, I would say. Berserker actually is able to generate a lot of gold off of that fight, ends up getting a double kill and actually plays it really, really well, but Golden Guardians end up trading back as well. It ends up being, I believe, a 2-for-1 in favor of Cloud9, but Golden Guardians are able to pick up the Herald because Stixay does fight back quite a bit and is able to equalize the fight in a way. Both AD carries playing really well in the early game here, where it really starts to be a little bit of a problem is this fight around first Baron and the only Baron of the game, which you know, looks okay for Cloud9 at first. It looks like they're just kind of going in. Golden Guardian's not really going to get much, and they're just going to disengage, and the Baron dance will continue, but Eminus ends up TPing in because he's, you know, in the bot lane trying to shove it out, and he ends up TPing directly into the middle of the entire Golden Guardians team. He is immediately CC'd, and he is immediately killed, and that's just the door opening for Golden Guardians to then go and take Baron, which they get for free, because what the hell was Eminus doing there? It wasn't the first and the only play that Eminus made in this game that was poor. He was super far behind in laning phase, down like 40 CS. Just a bad game overall from him. We're going to go ahead and talk about that. But then we eventually just get this big fight in the base at 27 minutes because Golden Guardians don't feel like they need to stop. River with a really nice engage to pick off Berserker, and then from that point onwards, the fight is just over. They have no other damage on the side of Cloud9, and they're able to end the game in 28 minutes. Another very clean win. This reminded me a lot of game number 5 in the previous series, and Golden Guardians looking really good again. They probably should have won game 1. They definitely won game 2. 2, this is a team that I think, you know, for all intents and purposes, for all the upsets and, you know, for the storylines going into this, that they're the underdogs and they really shouldn't be here, they have proven that they deserve to be here. They have proven that they deserve to be in the top 2 of the LCS right now, especially with how they've started off this series, and they played it really well. My player of the game is going to go to River on this Wukong. A lot of fantastic engages coming out from Wukong here, and that's what I want to see. I know River gets a lot of credit for the Jarvan, but Wukong has probably been his most efficient pick over the course of 2023 in particular, because he hasn't gotten to play the Jarvan a whole time with a lot of the bans that ended up being taken away. Now, Vi is in a similar boat, but I think the Wukong has honestly been better for him, and these are the big reasons why. His early game aggressiveness really plays well with what Wukong can do and, you know, what he's able to kind of get out of that pick. And so overall, really, really like River. I thought he played well, but this was a team effort. Gory played great, even if he did kind of get caught out in a bit in the mid game there by Eminence, kind of losing a 1v1 even down, or up, I should say, a bunch of gold, but 6A and Huki were great on the Xayah Rakan. This pick has been very good for them over the course of the playoffs. In my opinion, it's been the thing that they have been the best at over the course of the playoffs so far, and I would expect them to stick on it. And Licorice was good in the late game team fights, even if top lane really wasn't all that interesting this game, but Golden Guardians much more of a team effort than one player kind of dragging them across the finish line. As for Cloud9, you're gonna get a little bit worried with this loss. Yes, it's only 1-1, but you kind of stole one in game number 1, and you definitely weren't able to hang in game number 2, so some question marks are going to be raised. Eminence has been bad this series so far. He's going to get my dud of the game here. One of his signature picks in the Akali, something that certainly he is well known for at the LCS level and is definitely his playstyle. He just wasn't able to make any sort of impact on in this game. You know, he kind of called Gory's bluff. He went for the skill matchup and he lost it. And that's never really a particularly good sign. Now, it's not to say he's the only member of the team that played bad. I thought Blabber was particularly bad in this game on the Sejuani. Not a great game from him. One of the worst of his playoff runs so far. Fudge was accomplishing nothing on the Cassante. And no Berserker I thought was team fighting well. There's really just not a lot of peel that he had on this team, especially when the Wukong was diving the backline. And so there really wasn't a lot of opportunities for him to be able to win these team fights. But you know, Cloud9's got to turn this around. I know it's only 1-1, but like I said, the momentum is certainly not in their favor, especially with Golden Guardians keeping their mental after that game number 1. Somehow, like, I said this at the end of game 1. If I was Golden Guardians and I was walking to the back after that first game, I would have been tilted out of my mind. Like, I would not have been able to come out in game number 2 and put on this performance. This is a confidence booster. This shows that you really are that team. That game, that lead in game number 1 was not an accident, and you're able to sustain it. Now, are you going to be able to do it for the rest of the series? That's only for games 3+ to tell, but the series is tied up, and it's going to be really interesting. So who's going to be able to take game 3 and really bring the series into their hands? Is it going to be Cloud9 or is it going to be Golden Guardians? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Cloud9. They are able to take the third game in this series. They're able to take control with a 2-1 series lead, and they're able to prove that the first 2 games of the series could have just been them warming up, because this was a decisive win. The shortest game of the series so far here in game number 3, and it's an early game comp that just snowballed way too far out of control. I love the draft coming out here from Cloud9. I really do think that they kind of identified what Golden Guardians wanted to do. They said, okay, well, what happens if we pick the early game comp and we win early? And then they realized that Golden Guardians probably just aren't going to be able to come back and win that kind of game. It feels like GG have finally been figured out a little bit. I was kind of waiting for teams to pick up on it. I sometimes talk about this with teams on the channel, but it sometimes can be very obvious the kind of play styles that teams like to go for. Golden Guardians in particular like to play for that early game aggressive style and then just hope that they can end the game pretty quickly. Cloud9, if they could generate leads in this series, they're going to be in a good spot. And man, Renekton, Elise, Lucian, Nami are going to be able to generate some early game leads in this series. But let's go ahead and talk about what happened in game number 3 here. Early game was pretty close, the closest early game of the series by far, but a lot of that is just because Cloud9 was playing an early game comp and they could actually compete with Golden Guardians this time. A couple of poor plays from GG to start the game, mostly Stixxay just kind of walking up and dying in that first engage for first blood down in the bot lane. Both junglers were there and it looked like Golden Guardians wanted to fight and probably could fight and actually contend with this, but Blabber ends up landing Cocoon on Stixxay because he's just right at the front. He's just like walking at the Elise early game, which I just don't understand. He ends up getting hit with Cocoon and just dying super early on. I can't imagine what the thought process was behind that. I like aggressive AD carries, but that play in particular is just not acceptable. But Some more plays that I would say are going back and forth for both teams. Eminence ends up getting sniped out by Gory to kind of bring Golden Guardians back, and then Cloud9 try to look for something onto the Kennen in the top lane, try to get this Elise Renekton duo lane pushed forward, but he actually outplays it, ends up trading 1-for-1. Pretty nice play from him in laning phase. We'll get to him out of laning phase in a bit, but he did do a good job in lane, I would say, overall. Really close mid gank, but it does work out for Cloud9. They are able to pick up a kill onto Gory. You know, back and forth stuff. I mean, Golden Guardians is able to generate a small lead, but really not enough to be able to push things forward, and Berserker ends up evening out that gold with a really aggressive play in the mid game, solo killing Stixxay under tower with full combo coming out from Lucian. Berserker is just an absolute monster. I mean, the dude absolutely is probably the best player in LCS. There is competition for that, but like, I think Berserker is pretty much proven at this point that he's probably the most talented player in LCS. That includes Prince, that includes Blabber, players that I'm really high on. He's just on a different level from basically everybody, and him just absolutely obliterating Stixxay in the mid lane definitely shows that off. But that's really just to even up the gold. There's a couple of plays in the mid to late game that really start to lean in favor of Cloud9, where they start to get their leads. It's just pick after pick after pick. They get River caught out in the river, ironically enough, right before that third dragon, and they were able to secure that for free. They put themselves at soul point for free. Licorice gets caught in the bot lane and then solo killed by Fudge. 2 more deaths coming in on the Kennen, who, Licorice on Kennen this series was just not very good, and it's just pick after pick after pick. A lot of this ends up turning into objectives. I already talked about how C9 was on soul point. Well, they end up getting Baron basically for free, and then they get Soul basically for free. No fights coming in for Golden Guardians because they're just getting caught at the wrong times, and it's allowing Cloud9 to basically get everything they want for free. They end up generating a lot of these stats. They're Renekton, Elise, Lucian, with Soul, with Baron, and they just kind of power it through into the end of the game. Like, they just kind of run it down. Eminence eventually gets online. Licorice gets absolutely blown up, and then they just close the game out. Like, it's clean stuff from Cloud9. They knew exactly what they wanted to do in this game. Very good game strategy, I would say, overall from Cloud9. Mithy obviously doing a really good job in this one, identifying Golden Guardians' weaknesses and really just taking away their strengths and really making them have to prove that they can play a different style. And, spoiler alert, they kind of couldn't in this game, and it puts Cloud9 up 2-1. But player of the game for me is going to go to Berserker on this solution. The dude is just nuts. Like, mechanically speaking, he's just an absolute menace. That solo kill of Stixxay in the mid lane was disgusting, and the damage that he was outputting towards the back half of this game was also a little bit of a problem. Stixxay was really, really bad in this game, and in most circumstances, I would give him dud of the game, but we'll talk about Licorice in a second. But the player that I think is going to go under the radar, because people are talking about Berserker, they're talking about Eminence, who also had a really good game, is Blabber on this Elise, who had a stellar game. I mean, this is exactly what I want to see. I want to see him off of the Sejuani, as good as he is on picks like that, and the Gragas, and these things that are a little bit more team fight oriented against River and against Golden Guardians in particular. Put him on someone that can play make early. Put him on someone that gives him the ability to, be up tempo, to kind of control the pacing of the game. Elise absolutely does that for him, and he proved that that's the right call in this game. Not a lot of people are going to look at him in the plays that he was able to make, but Blabber was very, very, very much a big reason why Cloud9 was able to win this game. Blabber and Berserker, in my opinion, and then Eminence towards the back half of the game were the big standouts. But Fudge and Sven also played well, especially Fudge in that solo kill. As for Golden Guardians on the other side, though, I mean, this is a bad game. You got exposed in this, and quite frankly, you're going to have to prove that you can do something else, that you can, win a game that goes like this, because Cloud9 clearly feels like they found the formula to beat you. Dead of the game for me is going to go to Licorice. How could it not? I mean, a miserable Kennen performance. Just as bad, if not worse, than game number 1's, and I think at this point, you just have to take him off. Like, he can't play the Kennen against Fudge. Like, it's just not going to happen. 2 games in a row of that pick going bad. Again, I know a lot of people are criticizing the build. They're criticizing no stopwatch. They're criticizing no Zonias. It's not the most outlandish thing in the world. In fact, it's incredibly common if you look at, how other pro players are playing Kennen. That's been one of the more popular builds of the champion, dating back to Worlds last year. But, people don't really look at that kind of stuff. They see solo queue and they play the champion, and so they just, make blanket statements on Reddit. That's just kind of how it goes. I understand why Licorice went the build, because if he's not doing damage, he's entirely useless. But also, if he's getting blown up, he's entirely useless. It just kind of feels like a lose-lose situation. And in this game, he was just playing bad. It wasn't the build's fault, in my opinion, that he was playing as bad as he was. But Stixxay was also horrendous. This was one of the worst games of the playoffs for him. Just completely outclassed by Berserker in almost every aspect of the game. Really throwing away any semblance of survivability that Zeri could have had in any fight. River didn't have a good game, and Gory was not really all that good. He didn't really do anything wrong, but it's not like he could do much. Cloud9 just outclassed them. This was a demolition. It was the shortest game in the series for a reason, and Golden Guardians simply have to bounce back. We've already seen them control their mental and come back. They did it not only today, but yesterday in the semifinals as well. They've got to be able to do it in game number 4, or else their finals and their spring split are over, and Cloud9 are going to be crowned as champions. So is game 4 going to be our last game of the spring split here in the LCS, or is Golden Guardians going to push us to a game number 5? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Cloud9. They are able to take game number 4. They're able to close out the series, and they are your 2023 LCS Spring Split champions. They did it. They are able to beat Golden Guardians in the finals, as we all kind of thought they would be able to, and they're able to hoist that LCS trophy. Really good stuff coming out from them in this game, in this series. I know we're all going to be talking about that game number 1, and what if Golden Guardians would have hung on, but especially after that game number 2, it really felt like Cloud9 had figured out what Golden Guardians really could do in this series and capitalized on their game plan of being able to shut them down in the early game, generating strong leads, and Golden Guardians not really being able to counteract that. So big credit to Cloud9, big credit to the players, to the coaching staff for being able to understand what is going right and what is going wrong in the series and adapt into walking away with a 3-1 win and with another title in the rafters for this historic organization. What ended up happening in game number 4? Of course, we could sit here and talk about Cloud9 winning all day long, but how did they end up getting there? Well, it's just another really good early game coming out from them. And again, as we saw in game 3, that's just a very good path to success against a team like Golden Guardians that relies so much on their pressure at the beginning of the game. Basically, every single lane getting pressure on the side of Cloud9. Eminus lands a solo kill onto Gory with some really good play. A really nice gank in the top lane from Blabber shuts down Malphite getting dove under tower, because there's literally nothing he can do about that. A good gank bot lane gets Berserker and Sven rolling. Like, every single lane on the side of Cloud9 is winning, is leading, and Cloud9 has generated a really nice gold lead by the time we hit the mid game. Now, wasn't a perfect early game coming out from C9. They did get a little bit over-eager in the mid lane. It looked like they got a catch onto Huhi on this Nami, but unfortunately, Blabber goes a little bit too deep, ends up getting stunned into the wall and dying. But outside of that, there really weren't a lot of mistakes coming out from C9 in this early game and in this mistake. We get a fight around Herald, but GG just can't fight at all. It ends up being a 2-for-0, and then a little bit later, Licorice ends up dying top lane to another gank again. Just play after play after play of Cloud9 getting pick after pick after pick, securing objectives, being able to get kills, and just driving this gold lead into the stratosphere. And that's really the story of the mid game, is pick after pick after pick. You can talk about, you know, the one on Licorice in the top lane. You can talk about more on Gory in the mid lane, or on Huhi, or on Stixxay. You know, just pick after pick after pick, creating pressure all around the map. There's really not a lot that Golden Guardians can do, and by the time we hit 15 minutes into the game, it really does feel over. Very similar to how it felt in game number 3, and as we know, you know, Cloud9's not really one of those teams to just kind of let it go. Golden Guardians do try their best to initiate stuff towards the back half of the game. We saw them try and force third dragon, but C9 just absolutely obliterates the fight. The Poppy ultimate can send the Wukong out of there to not make it a 50-50 and just, you know, basically get them to soul immediately. And then, you know, we're seeing more solo kills. We're seeing Eminence solo kill Stixxay, and, you know, we hit this point in the game where Baron's gone. Soul is on the side of Cloud9, and it's very similar to game 3, where they can just kind of run it down. Credit to Golden Guardians, they feel like they need to push something, so they go all in on Fudge to try and get a catch, but he ends up getting out. He's got the Ragnarok to not be CC'd, he ends up getting out, and Cloud9's able to push into the base. Golden Guardians don't have any ultimates left because they spent them all trying to kill Fudge, and the game just ends. Really good stuff for Cloud9, and what a series. What a series from what, in my opinion, is the definitive best team in North America right now. Cloud9 repeating what they were able to do in 2022 summer, being the best team in North America, being a worthy champion. A lot of people are going to say that Golden Guardians outplayed them in the first 2 games, and while that is correct, as soon as Cloud9 wisened up to what Cloud9 or what Golden Guardians were able to do in those first 2 games and why they were able to generate such large leads, it really didn't, you know, it really felt like it was not sustainable for GG. And a lot of that was Cloud9 just coming together as a unit. Player of the game for game number 4 is going to go to Blabber for me on the Poppy, and I think you can make a really solid case that he's player of the series. I think Broadcast ended up giving it to Fudge. I'm going to give it to Berserker in the bot lane. I didn't give him MVP, so this is kind of my consolation prize. He's going to get my finals MVP, just like he got in 2020 summer. To me, he was the most important player on the team. Eminence had some stellar games on his signature, LeBlanc, that we saw a ton. In Academy is the solo kill god. He got a lot more in this game as well, but it was Poppy, it was Berserker. it was, you know, the Olaf that I think really kind of changed the game in terms of what this team was able to do in this final one, and all of them basically playing perfect, except for Blabber going a little bit too deep on that one engage. Outside of that, I mean, Poppy completely controlled this game. You know, Olaf was unkillable towards the back half, and Berserker was dealing a ridiculous amount of damage. Outside of the first couple of games, Sven was also really good in this series. I do think he played the team fights really well, just had some mishaps in the laning phase in the early couple games, but overall, Cloud9 are worthy champions. They absolutely deserve to be at the mountaintop. And I'm kind of excited to see what they can do at MSI. Now, I know a lot of people are, you know, a little bit shy when it comes to what Cloud9 might be able to do, and I agree, it's certainly not fair to put them on the same level as any of the Korean or Chinese teams, but, you know, with Europe having a little bit of a down year, Cloud9 could be an interesting team, and I'm interested to see what they can do internationally. As for Golden Guardians, unfortunate way to go out. Hopefully teams don't watch their tape, you know, teams that are at MSI don't end up watching how this team plays the game and how they end up losing, because they do have a very clear style, but they are very good at that style. Unfortunately, it just wasn't meant to be in this best of 5. My dead of the game is going to go to Licorice, but more so than the other games that I gave dead of the game to Licorice, this could have gone to a few people. Stixxay had a pretty miserable series. I know a lot of people are going to defend him because the team comp is like a solo damage comp, and, you know, you're relying a lot on Stixxay, but his positioning was just too much in the series. It honestly felt like he kind of took the onus to carry a little bit too seriously, and he was making these plays that just weren't going to be able to work in the same way, and that's kind of what we saw in this series. He was way too aggro. Licorice was awful in lane, was getting obliterated in the late game, had absolutely no self-awareness to know when to back off. Clearly, that's a vision problem for Golden Guardians, but his team fighting was bad. It was just the two players that kind of got them here that kind of disappointed, and that's frustrating. River and Gory kind of being the constants for this team, not exactly being the carries in that series against FlyQuest, but also not being the problems in this series against Cloud9. Golden Guardians have a high upside, but I think we definitely saw kind of the limit. Now, a lot of people are going to say they didn't deserve to be here in finals. Obviously, I disagree. They took Cloud9 in games 1 and 2 to their absolute limit, and just because they got figured out doesn't mean they didn't deserve to be here. It's just going to be interesting to see if a team can continue their momentum moving into an international tournament where they're now not going to be facing FlyQuest, who's struggling. They're going to be facing actually good teams from major regions. It's going to be interesting to see, but Golden Guardians is a super fun team to watch. They're a super easy team to cheer for, and I'm excited to see what this organization can do for the first time on the international stage. But congratulations to Cloud9. They end up walking away champions, and I can't say I'm surprised, but I can say that I'm glad that these players end up showing that all the hype was definitely deserved. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LCS 2023 Spring Split Semifinals and Finals overview and analysis, but also my Spring Split overview and analysis. It's been a really fun ride. Covered every single game this split. If you haven't checked out the playlist, if you haven't seen all of my coverage on the LCS, I didn't just cover the playoffs, I didn't even just cover the finals, I covered every single game that went down in the LCS this split. You can check that out up in the iCard right now, but for those of you who have been along the ride, I really do appreciate you guys. You mean a lot to me. I really have fun making a lot of these videos. I have fun going over, you know, my home region here in North America with the LCS, and even though there's not always a lot of positivity surrounding the gameplay and the community in general, a little bit of a doomer attitude towards the league as a whole, it was an absolute blast to be there live in Raleigh to see these finals and to, you know, celebrate with the players and the teams and to get to meet a lot of them. This is a great community. We've got some great players. We've got some great teams, and, you know, hopefully this summer can be just as fun and fruitful. I hope you guys enjoyed. Of course, if you did, leave a like on the video. It really does mean a lot for me. Of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We don't just cover the LCS on this channel. We cover every single major region. We just covered the LCK finals, you know, with the LEC kind of heading into their group stage right now. It's a good time to hit that subscribe button to get those videos, and the LPL finals are really, really fast approaching, and so I'm incredibly excited to go over those, and, you know, stick around if you guys are interested in that kind of content. But, of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.